Hey, welcome to Adventures in Angular, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things Angular related. This show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Unvoid. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Unvoid with a UNVOID provides remote design and software development services on a performance basis, so clients only pay for delivered tasks. In today's episode, we'll talk about many topics, but mostly surrounding code documentation. We are here with the co-creator of Compodoc, Vincent Ogloblinsky.
Hello.
And my name is Lucas Paganini. I am the CEO of Unvoid and your host in the podcast. And yes, let's get started. So, Vincent, just to introduce everyone, could you provide everyone with a brief explanation of Compodoc, what it is, which problems it solves?
Okay, it's a command line tool you can install inside your Angular projects to generate very quickly static documentation of all the code base, your Angular code base, which can be your components, your services, etc., your modules, etc. And using parsing of code base and etc. we will see later can generate a documentation like in JavaScript or in other languages, Javadoc or JavaScript JSDoc, etc. And to quickly find and having a correct syntax and documentation of all the methods of services or a component, what are the outputs and inputs, and etc.
Okay, so um, let's talk a bit about JSDoc and TSDoc because I think this is an interesting concept for people to understand. So Compodoc itself is not a language, is not a standard for how you document your projects. It is basically an extractor of your JSDoc or TSDoc tags, and then it transforms this documentation that you wrote using JSDoc or TSDoc syntax into a website that people can navigate, and you can make it publicly available or internally available in your organization so that other developers can understand your project. Is that it?
Yes, we have the source of truth is the code base, and after inside the code base, you have two main information. For an example, for a function, we have maybe sometimes you have JSDoc commands, which can be generated automatically with an ID or maybe manual with manual writing from the developer. And you have using TypeScript and the abstract syntax tree of the code base, you can extract information about the typings of everything inside the function, outside the function, and we use that to mix and explain and generate the documentation after.
Interesting. So it's not just what we explicitly write in our TS docs, it's also the types that you can extract using the TypeScript compiler. Is that it?
Yes, it's the power of TypeScript that enhance the code base with static informations. We can use that on the code base side because it's inside the code, so the file, the source code, and it's used. We are a tool which is not running in the browser in runtime, so we rely on the static code base. So you have everything we need to find information, and we have the chance to use that and be able to generate and trying to understand. It's the most difficult part after the relations between everything.
Okay. When I think of code documentation and making the documentation available for others to consume, I generally think of two scenarios. And I'm sure there are many others, but I generally think of those two, which are API documentation. And then in that case, you're actually documenting the routes that your application has, which verbs you can use to interact with those routes, which data you should send, and what you can expect to receive back. So that kind of documentation. And then you have documentation, which is, for example, for a library, in which you're actually seeing the type signatures of each individual method or of the functions or classes that this particular library exposes. What we've been talking about thus far seems to me that Compodoc is much more heavily focused on the last use case that I said, in which you're actually documenting the signatures of the functions and methods of your direct code. So people are going to have direct access to your code. But can and should it also be used to document other things, such as API documentation, or do you think that goes outside the scope of this
No, it's
tool?
outside the scope because we are focused on or firstly on Angular project and after we enhance with Nest project and Stencil projects also because they also rely on TypeScript and we will be able to generate what we want with TypeScript informations and they are yes they are our Nest.js is the backend framework, but it's the same ecosystem or same structure at the beginning as like Angular. So it was very easy for us to support this kind of project also. But the most of the time, it's yes, the second scenarios. It's a library or a set of components inside a specific Angular UI library. For example, I have some projects we use Compodoc because they open on the inside the open source world of internally inside the company they generate and they maintain Angular components code base for the company and they need to have a clear documentation of each components and what the other developer needs to understand and find, which are most of the time what are the inputs and outputs of the components and the methods available, like the video tag inside HTML. It's the same process.
Okay. You said that the inputs are the JS doc and TS doc and also the TypeScript types. What other information is used as inputs for Compodoc? I imagine that the folder structure, probably.
No, because we try to be more the most of the time agnostic or from the structure of the code base. We just try to we can have information with a TypeScript AST and import export file, so we know which file is related directly linked or not with everything. But try to have the tree, the structure, documentation. It's most of the time focused on your components, your modules, your services, and after other topics from TypeScript like your enums, your types, your classes, etc. And we just group them in by type and try to generate the documentation like this kind of tree organization for the documentation. And we just enhance the generated documentation with you can enhance with other markdown files to add other information and static information about the project, the library, etc. But the most of the time, it's the code base and all the relations which are used.
Nice. So, for example, if there's a particular file in my code base that doesn't follow the Angular folder structure, which is, for example, having an individual file for each component, each module, each service. Let's say that I have a file that actually declares three components or three services or two components and one service. That is not going to be a problem with Compodoc because it doesn't assume any particular file structure.
Oh. No, no, the link to the file source code will be the same just for the three components, but that is not it's not a problem, or it's not our main focus for us.
Okay, let's talk about the presentation of the docs because I can see that Compodoc has a default template that comes with it. But what if, and I imagine that a lot of people will want that, what if they want to have a different interface for the code that is outputted from
We
Compodoc?
try to supply different teams, and after you have the option to supply other CSS files and other static size. Maybe I don't remember, but you can change the design of the generated documentation to match, for example, your internal company design, etc. If you need, or the project, and to don't have a default team like other project, for example. For
And the teams, they are all provided and maintained and created directly by the Compodoc creators, or is there like an open standard for documentation teams? Because I know that there are a lot of other tools that generate code documentation. So I was wondering if there's a particular standard format in which those docs can be outputted so that we can reuse teams that were created for other tools.
no, no, it's a problem of our ecosystem. It's most of the time everything is located with the tool or the because there's a system you use, etc. So maybe it could be fine, but having standards for the code base, it's a big problem and a big topic today. So maybe if we just now have, and I think guys behind the GSDoc and TypeDoc or TSDoc are working to enhance the GSDoc with other way to generate and create comments and have a standards to be able to parse them better. But on the end side of the generated documentation, now we are stuck with what each tool can generate.
And what about custom teams? What if I want to build a specific design just for the docs of my library? How hard is it?
We are relying on the Handlebars library for the templating system. So sometimes there is an option you can provide another Handlebars template to override the default template. Maybe if you the structure of the component templates you don't like it, you can enhance or override it to generate the and modify this page, and just that the structure of the template with handlebars template and the CSS after if you want to change the color, the themes, etc.
Okay. What if I want to use Angular to render the documentation? How would
Well,
we
you
go
could
about that?
also, because we generate the default outputs are HTML pages with static files like JavaScript and CSS, and we can generate JSON file with all the information we have found and the structure we can use inside the documentation. So you can use this JSON to generate another interface for your documentation if you need.
Okay. So the path there would be you export only the JSON format and then you just go crazy trying to actually build a UI from it. Okay,
Uh,
interesting.
in our ecosystem and yeah, in software industry, you have to be sometimes open-minded to crazy
Mhm.
ideas, and you can't have all the ideas at the beginning of the project. So it's not difficult for us to generate a JSON file. So we generate, and after you do what you want with that.
Nice. Okay. And how type safe is that JSON file? Like, can I import um, type declarations from Compodoc that gives me strict type definitions for the structure of this JSON file to make sure that I'm treating all possible edge cases?
Maybe it's, it was last year I worked on this feature, so I don't remember everything. But yes, I will rely on a type JSON to explain statically the structure of the JSON. So it's like the Angular. Don't remember. Um, the Angular CLI has the same kind of files or structure, but we try to be in the same philosophy.
Okay. And you said that it was built mainly for Angular code bases, but now you actually support other code bases such as Nest and Stencil. Um, why those two? I mean, Nest is kind of obvious. The structure is almost the same. But I must say that I'm not very familiar with Stencil. So why that one?
Because it's they are web components, so they are just like web Angular components. So it was based on TypeScript code, so it was easiest for us to. And I think at this time I was working on some stencil projects, so it was cool. Can I have a documentation for that? Okay, I will enhance Compodoc in 1 or 2 days, and I will be that also. So it was a cross story of two needs.
Gotcha, gotcha. So there was personal interest, but also it wasn't that far from the needs of Angular code bases. Makes sense. Interesting. How would I add extra inputs that maybe don't exist in TSDoc or JSDoc natively? So I understand that TSDoc and JSDoc, they have a limited set of tags that I can use to mark the contents of my doc. But what if I want to add a particular information, but the tag for that simply doesn't exist?
We don't have that. We don't have that at this time. And we we try to support the most used TSDoc and GSDoc tags available, and I don't I don't see directly. I don't have the feedback from using. Maybe I don't remember, but it was yes. It's a good question because I couldn't have something a generic code base who can use that to support this kind of feature. But it's very difficult because after we have to mix and try to plug what the information you have put in your tag and the relation with the code base after, and what you want to explain, etc. So, or maybe it can be available, but I'm I'm a bit skeptic about how we could build to be not too focused and not too generic. It's always the same balance.
Makes sense. For example, if a team has that particular need, then they are probably an exception. But if they are such an exception, they will probably understand that they're not going to find a team that outputs that information because it's created particularly for their needs. So, do you know if in the JSON file that can be outputted from Compodoc, if Compodoc doesn't recognize a tag, is it included in the JSON or is it excluded from the JSON? Because that could be a way for people that if they want to render an information that is outside of the standard JSDoc, TSDoc, at least they have this path of, hey,
Yes,
you
we
can
can.
use the
Yes, we
JSON.
can. If we don't know the tag, we exclude it. We exclude the comments of the tag. We don't exclude the function of the or the method or the parameter, etc., or the property. Uh, but we could, for example, supply a feature or an option to say, okay, give me a list of custom tag you want to add to the internal code base of Compodoc, and after when we see that, we use them as standard doc comments, etc. But most of the time, people just want to tag this something internal, deprecated, or private, etc. And just these three tags used, and after the rest is default public by default, etc. It depends.
Just a Pareto rule, right? So, okay. And in any case, I imagine that people can also just have a markdown file and then they can, the markdown files, there are going to be included in the final output. So if I have like a README in a particular folder, is that included in the final website?
We paused and tried to find at the root of the project a README file, and after we support the structure of maybe you can add a specific markdown for a specific component, for example, at the root of this folder where there is a component, and if we detect one markdown here, we add another tab in the component pages where you can add the details and the markdown text inside to have a focused documentation of a specific component, for example. So, for example, which is the main topic of this component or the main use case, etc. And you can explain it inside this markdown, and it can be very focused and very located inside this component pages.
All right. Let's bring back a bit the topic of use cases. When we were talking about use cases, my question was mainly if it could be used for API docs or not. And we already concluded that no, it doesn't make sense for that. But in the topic of use cases, I think we can talk a little bit more about to whom this is interesting, because it's obviously interesting to authors of open source libraries. But I don't think that we, at least for me, as an Angular developer, I didn't yet felt convinced that I should use Compodoc in my private Angular project and just to, for example, I don't know, I think it actually is going to depend on the interdependencies that your team has with other teams. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. Like, from your perspective, when do you think it makes sense for a team to use Compodoc? And when do you think it doesn't make sense outside of the obvious use case, which is open source libraries?
I think when you are just one or two people inside the team, maybe you don't need, but we discussed that before. Maybe you are one or two people, and the one or two people 10 months later will thanks the one who are here to just add some remarks and documentation about the project and etc., to understand why they choose this algorithm at this time and why not this one, etc. And after, most of the time, if the team grows with 3, 5, 10, or 20 people, or just 5 people, but relying with other internal projects or other projects, maybe it's most of the time it's better for everyone to have a documentation and something to understand very quickly. But I'm an evangelist around the way that the most of the time the source of truth and the only source of truth is the code base, and the better way to understand and to find a way to, when you enter a new project, as a developer, the first the first way you can enter inside this project is to clone the code base and after discover the code. Maybe you can have other documentation of files or topics explaining other files, but for us, for our developers, it's a code base. And after entering inside a big code base, it's always better to start with the documentation, and after you focus on maybe on one part of the project, and you will see this part of the code base, or you just try to discover every folder, every structure, etc. But it is for that best practices around structure, code base, etc. are very important to rely, because it can help you 10 months later, or your teammate, and or other teams after.
And bringing to your current reality of teams using Compodoc, you currently work at
Mm-hmm.
Orange, right? Which is this gigantic, for those of you that might not be aware of it, Orange is a gigantic telecommunications company, mainly operating in
Mm-hmm.
Europe. Is that right?
In
Okay.
the
And sorry,
mainly,
go ahead.
but we are on other international country also, but mainly in Europe.
And it's an absolutely gigantic company, which I imagine has dozens, if not hundreds, of teams and thousands of different projects. So, how is the usage of Compodoc and other documentation tools in such big enterprise scenarios?
Most of the time, it depends on the team, on the if they are junior developer or senior developer, etc., and how they can use this kind of tool, and how they can use it very quickly, and they understand the benefits of having it. Sometimes it depends on the size of the project, and it's very focused, and it's very closed, with just two people, and it is for myself, for example, a research project. We don't need documentation; we just need a little README at the root of the project, and it just works fine. And after, if the project grows, or there is more people inside the team, and you work with other team, or you supplying an internal library, etc. In every Angular or JS or etc., we always recommend to generate and provide the documentation for other teams. And I think it's a standard of the best practices, which is very known and used in many teams.
But it's not a hard requirement. For example, it's more like a recommendation. So there are going to be projects that don't use it. Okay.
It's always the same
Um,
thing. It's always difficult to to put inside the project, or inside our ecosystem, our front-end ecosystem, inside a team and a new project, to say, okay, you have to use that, etc. It's better to say, okay, generate the documentation, use the tool you want, Compodoc, Docusaurus, TSDoc, TypeDoc, etc. What you want. We just need the documentation. If it's just Markdown, etc., it's your problem to generate it and maintain it the easiest way. And that we don't try to mandate everything, because as a developer, we need to be open and not stressed by many tools, many things that can don't give us a sense of freedom.
Right.
After it's
Right.
our responsibility as a developer, as a team, to provide something which is correctly like a production or very robust product.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about versioning? What if you, for example, open source libraries, they are going to have multiple different versions of the library. Every time there's a release, they're not just going to put it on master and let continuous deployment deploy that. They're actually going to tag the release. So how can they does I think my question is mostly, does Compodoc offers any utilities to facilitate the process of versioning in the documentation, or is this up to the developers to actually um, build the documentation of all the different versions and deploy them to the correct
Yes, there
domains?
was an issue many years before around this topic, and our position was to keep it simple, stupid for our side. So it's not the most of the time the best way for the end users, but we try to say, okay, we generate something at one time for one code base. As a end-to-end user, you have to maintain and use and generate what you need for your version. And if you have a 5 version, etc., try to build a script that generate for each version, or if you have hot fixes, etc., to regenerate this documentation for this version and host it in a subfolder of your main documentation.
Gotcha, gotcha. So it's more up to the
Mm.
developers to decide how they want to handle that. Okay. And I think my last big question with regards to Compodoc is roadmap. Um, is it still under active development? Is it more in a maintenance state? And if it's being actively developed, what do you see for the future of Compodoc?
I have I have time to work on that, and I try to actively maintain it. But try the main features are for me are here. We just have to supply and support every new major or minor versions of Angular, and major main feature or main APIs are deprecated. For example, modules maybe in later this year or next year will not be monetary and will not be the best way to structure the projects, etc. And we have to maintain and update a Compodoc to follow the same roadmap of Angular. And I think we have a big issue inside the code base around supporting all the routing structure you can have on your project. So it's a very difficult topic, because as we are relying on source code and the way people are writing their routes, etc., it's very difficult for us to find everything and to find all the relation between all the routes. So it's a big topic for us to maybe rewrite this part. And the other main part for this year or next year is to rebuild we can generate a graphic of the relation between all your models to understand which is the parent of another module, etc. And we'll will try to rebuild it or and support the standalone components and try to understand, or maybe if each component, if you have just standalone components in your application, if there are relation just by templating or not, and try to rebuild a graphic, a very mind map graphic of that later.
You said that there are issues with the way that people are implementing their routes. And that made me think of analog. I don't know if you ever play with it, but it's this framework on top of it's a meta framework on top of Angular, which basically eases all the pains of creating statically generated websites with Angular. So React got a lot of tools that made it easier for people to actually just build websites with React. Because quite frankly, neither React or Angular or Vue, they were not created for websites. They were created for things more complex than that. But people get used to those tools, and then when you try to just build a simple website without them, it, well, you know what happened. Everybody wanted to actually use those tools for things that were not the main use case, and they wanted to build websites with them. So for React, we had a lot of tools that allowed this process to be easier, like Gatsby and Next.js, which made it way easier to pre-render and just create static files from your original React source code. And Angular didn't have that thus far. And then Analog filled that gap. And the way that it does that is by also, not just by that, but one of the things that it introduces is file-based routing. So instead of actually declaring your routes as an array, as we're used to in our Angular applications, you can just have a file, just like you would have with Next, and then this file is going to be interpreted by Analog and turned into an actual page in the generated output. So would that be a big problem for Compodoc, for example?
No, we just have to understand how it works and how we could support it not and how it can help our internal model of routing support, or enhance it, and maybe I don't know, and I will have a check after, but it's always difficult to because we rely on static code base and TypeScript information, etc., and the abstract syntax tree, and after we try to make relation, understand relation, but it's sometimes difficult to plug everything.
Yeah, definitely. And the ecosystem is always growing, right? So it's not even feasible to say that particular technology is just going to support everything. But yeah, it's interesting to know that the way that Compodoc was built is like it. From what I understood, it doesn't currently support that use case, but also it wouldn't be too hard to add support for something like that.
I'm
Yes.
I always try to to say keep it simple, stupid, if you can, because if it's too complicated, or if you have a big code base and a big tool after, it's unmaintainable and too complicated to build or to update. So you have to to choose or to make decisions sometimes, and it's difficult.
Definitely. But I like that. And I think this is a good advice from a senior developer. There's this joke, right? Where like you're the path from junior to play, and then senior is the junior wants to do things the simplest way possible. But most of the time is because that's the path that he or she knows. Is not that they want the simplicity. Most often is more like they don't really know how to do it in a more complex way. And then the plain developer learns about all the patterns and all the cool things and the new technologies, and then they go into this path of introducing a lot of complexity. And then when you reach senior level, you're kind of back to the original thought, which was just make it simple, stupid.
I,
But now you
I was not,
actually
I
have
was not saying
everything
that
else.
sometimes you have to have a simplicity everywhere. You can abstract complexity with simplicity at the top level. But if you can have something which is more simpler inside your code base, inside your projects, etc., use it or try, because for you, for your team, 10 months or 2 years later, it will be better for everyone.
Definitely, definitely. All right. I think we can start wrapping up. We're already 42 minutes thus far, and honestly, it didn't felt like that. It was a very light and easy conversation. So, actually, thank you,
So
Vincent, for having so much to bring to the
thanks for
table.
having me. It was a
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, and but before we actually just finish up, is there anything that you would like to promote, or maybe just yourself, like content that you create? What would you like to share with the audience?
Not really a particular project. Just go on the open source project if you want to fill an issue or pull request or my project or other projects. It's always a pleasure as a maintainer to have feedbacks, bad or good, to give informations and help everyone, or another issue, help another developer on another project. It's always the problem of our open source ecosystem. It's we are relying on time of software developer for from their side project or from their free time, and sometimes little help or little message or little feedback. Just a message can be very powerful for us.
Definitely, definitely. And where can people find you? Like in which networks you're most active
On
in?
Twitter.
Okay. Okay. So Vincent Ogloblinsky on Twitter. Awesome. Vincent. Okay. Oh, and in my end, I'm only gonna quickly promote my company, of course. So if any of you has a software project and you are looking to either outsource that or to extend your team of developers, we work on a performance-based model, which means that clients only pay when tasks are delivered. So if it takes us more hours than we anticipated, that's our problem. That's not your problem, and you as a client should not care about that. You actually pay by the value that we deliver and not by the amount of work that it took for us to deliver. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you can go to envoyed.com and check out how we do that and reach out to us. Again, this is envoyed.com with U and void, so opposite of void. And yeah, I think this is all for me. Vincent, again, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely to meet you. And yeah, man, come back more often.
Thanks. Have a nice day. Bye.